How's it going, everyone? NeedleMouse here. Sonic music is actually peak, let's be honest here. There really isn't one Sonic game that has bad music. Ignore Sonic Eraser for me, okay? But of course, there are soundtracks that are better than others. And there are even Sonic OSTs that are simply sidelined due to, well, there being just too many amazing ones. With so many gems in the franchise, and so many of these games being obscure, too many soundtracks are relegated to the side and are barely used. Today, I thought it'd be great if we took a look at by far the most underrated Sonic OSTs. But this episode is quite special. Today, I have brought on 5 fellow content creators and my closest online friends to tackle the most underrated Sonic OSTs of all time. So let's dive straight into these beautiful soundtracks, starting off with the one and only Sonic Runners.
Usually, mobile games don't have very good soundtracks, which is understandable because mobile games have generally generic soundtracks, but that is not the case for Sonic Runners. If you didn't know, this short-lived mobile game called Sonic Runners came out in 2015. It was developed by Sonic Team, so this thing was top-notch and everyone loved it. Unfortunately, however, many things contributed to the game's closure only around a year after it launched. But one thing that most people remember about this game is its soundtrack. Being composed by Tomoyo Ohtani himself, this game has a banger soundtrack. Every track in this game has beautiful instrumentation and melodies. They're very memorable. The game is filled with tracks that follow similar theming to the level environments, which makes them unforgettable. The second you load up the game and hear the title theme, you pretty much know what the soundtrack has in store. Every song in this game is upbeat, lively, it just makes me f***ing happy. Up until this point, Tomoyo Ohtani had his ups and downs when it came to Sonic soundtracks. At this time, the latest soundtrack he composed for was Sonic Lost World, and while that soundtrack was okay, it was a little generic at times. But if you ask me, Sonic Runners has music that could work in Lost World as well, because, well, yeah, no shit, this game has the same set pieces as Lost World, but it just shows how Ohtani perfected that sound in Runners. It just sucks that this soundtrack is often overlooked when discussion of Sonic soundtracks is brought up. Since this was a very short-lived mobile game, this soundtrack seems kind of wasted, but at the same time, it shows the passion behind this little mobile game, which is why I feel like people love this game's soundtrack. Sure, it would definitely work for a mainline entry like Lost World, but it's just the fact that compared to other Sonic mobile game soundtracks, it completely shits on all of them. So yeah, Sonic Runners has a great soundtrack, and personally, it's probably in my top 5 Sonic soundtracks of all time.
So let me ask you something. Sonic 3D Blast, and everyone has already clicked off the video. Sonic 3D Blast is probably one of the most controversial Sonic games to come out of the 90s era of Sonic games. This game was Sonic's first, and I use that term very big here, this was Sonic's first attempt in 3D, even though Extreme was meant to be that, but we all know what happened there, so now we got this. This game launched in 1996 on the Sega Genesis, and unlike the other Sonic Sega Genesis games, where it was a 2D pixel game, in this new game, they took an existing 3D model of Sonic and pixelated it, kind of like what Nintendo and Rare did with the Donkey Kong Country games for the SNES, and at the same time, play Sonic in a Final Fantasy type game with an isometric camera angle of the game. Now, we all know about 3D Blast and how it is. Yeah, you know, slippery controls and very maze-like gameplay, but that's not what we're talking about today. What I want to talk about today is the soundtrack. Now, the OST for this game is really interesting and really not talked about enough today. No, I'm not talking about that one. I'm talking about this one. Not only did Sonic 3D Blast release on the Sega Genesis in '96, but it also released on the Sega Saturn. And not only was this version superior graphically to the Genesis version, but musically, oh man. 3D Blast on the Genesis soundtrack wasn't the worst thing in the world. I mean, there was always Sonic Spinball. Please make it stop. But the soundtrack is just okay. However, 3D Blast on Saturn is where things are different. Unlike the Sega Genesis limited sound chip, the Sega Saturn was a CD console. So, that meant that the game could have a pure, clear, clean audio files. So that means when Sonic 3D Blast came to the Sega Saturn, Sega would bring in Richard Jakes to redo this OST and turn it from one of the most meh Genesis OSTs into these beautiful pieces of art. My personal favorites have to be Green Grove Zone, Rusty Ruin, Volcano Valley, and the best one, Diamond Dust Zone. The redone tracks here are outstanding and even give this game a cinematic flair to it, especially Volcano Valley. This feels like straight up out of a movie or a big game released nowadays like God of War or another type of action game. Diamond Dust Zone has been turned from a traditional 16-bit snowy track to a beautiful Christmas Wonderland type theme. You know a track is good whenever I'm listening to it throughout the holiday season. And then there's Green Grove Zone. A little fun fact about this one, if you listen closely, you might notice that this might sound familiar. That's because it's kinda made similar to another song from another Sega game sung by TJ Davis called It Doesn't Really Matter. Basically, it's just sped up. Here, have a listen. Truly a work of art this OST is. It's so good, I was loving it, and I wasn't even born yet. But unfortunately, no one in the Sonic fan base really talks about this soundtrack anymore at all. This OST gets overshadowed a lot with all the other Sonic OSTs out there. This is one of the best Sonic Sega Saturn era game soundtracks ever. Then again, Sonic R holds the title for the best one of that era, so take that for what you will. But Sonic 3D Blast Sega Saturn soundtrack is really slept on a lot, and really no one just talks about it anymore. And I really think that it really deserves to be higher up there and one of the greatest Sonic soundtracks of the 90s. However, thanks to the now official hit Roblox Sonic game, Sonic Speed Simulator, that game's soundtrack uses a lot of the Sonic 3D Blast Saturn soundtrack, among other Sonic tracks too, but a lot of 3D Blast Saturn stuff. It's so cool to see these here. Maybe hopefully more Sonic fans after seeing them here will check out more of the soundtrack. Also, maybe it'd help if Sega actually released this soundtrack. Seriously guys, what's stopping you here?
Although Sonic Rush Adventure tends to get overlooked because Sonic Rush was generally always seen as the better Rush game, it's no slouch. It's one of the most underrated 2D Sonic games of all time, and one of the major reasons why it's so good is because of that super chill soundtrack. The best way that I can describe the OST is tropical vibes. The incredible main theme, New Venture, really makes you feel like you've got a cool breeze blowing past you on an island chilling with a cold one. And the hub worlds share a similar vibe. Plank Kingdom has a little bit of that Rush energy to it with the repeating samples to ease you into familiar territory and get you back into the swing of things if it's been a while since you played the first Rush game. Admittedly, I'm not too big of a fan of the mechanical sounding instrumentation of Machine Labyrinth, but it is very fitting, and I'd still listen to this over tracks and levels with similar aesthetics, such as Mad Gear from Sonic 4. Coral Cave makes me feel like I'm perpetually finding diamonds in a cave like it's Minecraft, and it feels really mystical. The intro to Blizzard Peaks gets you pumped for some good old-fashioned snowboarding, and it really helps that the track sounds surprisingly familiar. In fact, very similar to Altitude Limits track from Sonic Rush. Sky Babylon takes a lot of what worked in the previous Advance games like Sonic Advance 3's Chaos Angel, but it switches it up by going for a much more lighthearted and upbeat tone, as opposed to the eerie, near-endgame type of vibe that you'd expect from a level set in the sky. Pirate Island's theme sounds a lot like a special stage most of the time, but it also combines elements of fast-paced pirate music that makes it sound like you're always hearing cannons go off on a pirate ship. All the different ships also have their own background music, and they're all amazing because they could have easily just had the water bike theme play over and over again as you're sailing, but they knew that that would have been super repetitive, just like the Jazz and the Werehog's Night themes, so they went out of their way to give each of the watercrafts a unique feel. The boss themes are absolutely stellar, especially Deep Core. Overall, the game captures the spirit of sailing the seven seas on an epic pirate adventure, and for some reason it just never gets talked about, so it's super underrated.
Knuckles' Chaotix is one of my personal guilty pleasures. The game was released in 1995 on the 32X and is one of the rarest Sonic games ever, selling for as much as $400. Man, I would really like this game, guys. Like, it'd be really cool if I got this game, guys. Like, it'd be real. The game is not the best, I'll tell you that. But there are so many things I genuinely love about Chaotix. I love the environment. I love the characters introduced here too. But if there's one thing that Knuckles' Chaotix does absolutely right, it's the soundtrack. There is almost no other soundtrack in Sonic history that is this spiritual. Like, this game's soundtrack came down from the heavens. There's no other way to say it. Composed by Junko Shiratsu and Mariko Nanba, which I definitely butchered the names for. This is, for me at least, a top 10 Sonic soundtrack. There are so many pieces in this game that are just beautiful. During the Summer is probably the first song that comes to mind when I think of the soundtrack. It is one of the first pieces you hear when playing this game, and I just love listening to it when summer begins. And man, Evening Star might be one of my favorite pieces in Sonic history. The mellow beat is something I listen to all the time at night while reading a book and drinking some tea. There's something just ethereal about it, and I love it. Seascape is another amazing one. It fits the environment of Marina Madness quite well, and it feels beautiful for the dockside environment that we have here. I don't know why, but something about this song just screams oceans and seas. When playing through the level, it just feels like you can feel the sea breeze and smell the salt. But it doesn't feel like a piratey adventure like, say, something from Sonic Rush Adventure. It feels more like you're relaxing on a beach. just taking the beauty in. Midnight Greenhouse might be yet another perfect song that works perfectly for pedantic bass. Yet another very chill and calm song on our hands. Something about it just feels perfect for this green zone, and it sounds just amazing. Speed of Sound is one of the more upbeat pieces in Knuckles Chaotix, and I love it. Fitting its zone, Speed Slider, quite well, the upbeat song gets you ready for a level that almost always has you speeding along. Amazing Arena is cool in the fact that it has not one but 2 tracks. Labyrinth plays when the stage is desaturated, let's just say that. It's probably the most depressing song in the OST, and it's nothing particularly great, but it's not too bad either. But when the color is brought back to this level, New Moon plays, and it is amazing. It perfectly captures the happiness of brightness and colors returning to a dead zone. In fact, it sort of reminds me of Sonic CD and its bad and good futures mechanic. Except, this game is better than Sonic CD. Electoria for Techno Tower is a wonderful song. This song fits the trippy environment very well, and the electronic and metallic pieces sort of fit Techno Tower quite well. So yeah, overall, this OST is actually amazing. The game is pretty okay, honestly, and I wish a lot of people would give the game another chance. While not the best, there is some really good stuff in it. Especially that soundtrack, man, it's so good. But next, it's time to talk about one of my personal favorites.
Shadow the Hedgehog is a game that I find really intriguing. It has a lot of interesting ideas and mechanics, but when it's all squished together, it just kind of becomes mush. It's not really a whole lot of anything. But one standout that a lot of Sonic games have is that the soundtrack is great. From the vocal themes to the level themes to even random cutscene songs, there are just great songs in here everywhere you look. Which is kind of insane to think about because this soundtrack literally has almost 100 songs. 100 original songs made for the soundtrack. That's kind of crazy, actually. Well, don't get me wrong, Sonic games have started reaching that level again with, like, Frontiers and whatnot, but still, this is a lot of songs. So really all I aim to do here is highlight some hidden gems within this plethora of songs. Starting off, we have Prison Island. This is such a good song. I like how the guitar, while still really relevant, has a more simple rhythm to let the bass come through blasting. All of the intricate rhythms that the bass has just adds a whole layer of rhythm to this song. It is so fun to listen to. There's so many neat little licks and trills that you'll hear throughout this whole thing, which makes it just a great listen. Another one is Black Comet. This one is weird. It doesn't really align with the style of the rest of the game. It's a little bit of an oddball. It has this very mellow feel throughout the whole thing, which I really like. And the fact that it sounds different is actually pretty cool because, I mean, you're literally on an alien spaceship, so yeah, it probably should sound different. Shadow Android is another great one. This is literally a cutscene song. I don't know, they snapped. Oh my gosh, this is such a good song. Everything from the drums to the bass to the guitar, just all of it come together perfectly. This is one of my favorite songs from this game. Then there's the 2-player versus battle theme. This one is super underappreciated. Although it isn't technically an original track, it's really just a Radical Highway remix. It's still a really good remix. I love all of the additions here. It sounds great. The final hidden gem I'd like to bring up is Great Black Arms. This song is literally just a villain arc type beat, bro. This is so, like, I don't want to say menacing because this is a Sonic game, but it kind of is. I love the whole vibe here. It just has such a, I've just got to say it has such a intimidating vibe. I love it. I know this is really specific, but when I hear this song, I can't help but think that you got the hero and the anti-hero fighting, but then the real villain shows up, bro. I don't know why, bro. This is like entrance music, bro. I do not know what they were on when they made this. Probably some form of performance-enhancing drug, but this is a good song. Yeah. Okay. So those are really the hidden gems I wanted to bring up. I wanted to get those out first because that's probably my biggest priority because these songs are so underappreciated. But that does not discredit the main themes of this game. All of the vocal themes are great. I Am All of Me is a classic. I used to think it was just edgy and I didn't really like it that much. I used to think it was a pretty good song, but it has really grown on me. Almost Dead is so comedically edgy, and I love it. The Chosen One is so funny to me, bro, because this entire song is literally just
Shadow, have you considered killing yourself?
All Hail Shadow is also an amazing track, but honestly, the Crush 40 version is better, so Sorry. Last but certainly not least is Never Turn Back. Not only is this my favorite Sonic credits theme, Get Wrecked One-Way Dream, it is literally one of my favorite Sonic vocal themes ever. The intro is a little bit of, oh no, cringe, sad piano. But once the actual main part of the song kicked in, I was literally going, what the sigma? It's 12:20, what am I doing with my life? Never Turn Back is just amazing. I really cannot push this enough. This song is outstanding. And the same can be said about this soundtrack. I absolutely love this soundtrack. While it does have a lot of just okay songs due to the sheer amount of them they had to make for this game, there are so many standouts that I just think aren't recognized enough. Hence why I was able to talk about this soundtrack in this video. So hopefully me talking about this soundtrack could just inspire you to go check it out again. Because like I've been saying, there are just so many great songs that I just don't think people hear because of the Spotify version. Yeah, they kinda messed this up. Every single song I've mentioned here except Prison Island and most of the vocal themes, excluding Almost Dead, just aren't on the soundtrack. They just aren't there. So please, like I said, just use the YouTube playlist, trust. So that's really everything I gotta say about Shadow the Hedgehog and its amazing soundtrack.
So ever since Sonic Superstars was released, there has been a lot of talk and debate about a lot of topics on the game, but most notoriously the soundtrack, which has both been praised for T-Lope's tracks, but on the same coin, trashed for Jun Sonoe's tracks, for once again trying to emulate the quote-unquote Genesis style music. But I'm here to tell you that those tracks are actually really good. I personally really like those tracks and think that they're pretty underrated. Starting off with Sky Temple, I think the track perfectly encapsulates the feeling of being in a floating temple in the sky, with the harpsichord, the mini sound effects having an ethereal effect to them to make you feel like you're in this heavenly place, and the songs overall having a higher tone to it compared to most of the songs in the game. Next up, we have Press Factory. Oh, Press Factory. Specifically, Act 1. When this first came out, it was basically universally panned, mostly for the intro, hitting you with what can only be described as Sonic pinball synths. But as time went on, and I listened to it more and more, I grew an appreciation for it. The grungy and loud sound to it fits the stage, and in the middle part of the song, it really gets good, for me personally. Now, Golden Capital is, I can't defend this one. Now, Cyber Station, I feel like, is where the instrumentation that Jun uses fits really well, because the music fits perfectly for a cyberspace type stage with the bit crushed synths and the Genesis sound font. And finally, Egg Fortress Zone, specifically Act 2, where finally, for some reason at the end, Jun Sonoe decides to whip out his bass and actually use instruments, and it makes for what is probably my favorite track in the game. This deep bass mixed with the fast-paced synths and the whole fortress going in reverse makes it feel really intense. And later on, he pulls out the guitar too, and the intensity just increases. The whole track is such a breath of fresh air when it comes to Jun's music, at least, because he just decides to lock in and cook one of the best final act themes in a Sonic classic game ever. So yeah, I just think if Jun Sonoe used the Genesis sound font more effectively, or just scrapped it all and made actual instrumental tracks, his music would have been leagues better, because the composition for a lot of tracks are really good. He just needs to lock in and really use his sounds to his advantage.
And yeah, that's it. This was the most underrated Sonic OSTs. I hope after this video, a lot of y'all will check out these Sonic soundtracks, as they are genuinely amazing. I want to quickly say a massive thank you to SF Productions, Supercon, GWA, Stickman Guides, and Shawlove10 for hopping on in this video and just being amazing co-hosts and talking about all of these soundtracks. Please go check all their channels out. All their links will be in the description. They all make some of my favorite Sonic content of all time. I hope y'all enjoyed today's video. Have a wonderful day wherever you are in the world, and I'll see you all next time. Ciao!